What's going on, folks? Welcome back to Bed Boys, your one-stop shop for all your energy drink reviews and performance talks. I'm Christian,
I'm Brian.
and we are the Bed Boys. And today, I got a feeling, I feel it in my loins. We got another banger of an episode. It's just us two. Brian's soldiering through a little bit of sickness, almost lost his voice, but he's obviously a dog. So here we are recording, and I know he's got a couple drinks that look like bangers. I got a little something something up my sleeve, and we're gonna get into some other topics as well. So Brian, you want to start us off with what you got for beverages since we are the Bed Boys?
Yeah, I got us a little double header. And yeah, so for everyone else out there, you can hear it in my voice. It's a little nasty and scratchy, but I picked these up and I was like, I don't care what happens. We have to record even if I got to hold up notes. Like so I have two sick flavors of two different drinks. We have right here the grape flavor of the Bum Energy. Now, I still hate that they moved to the slim cans. I loved the short and stubby. Um, but to kind of kick us off here, 112 milligrams of natural caffeine, 250 milligrams of cognizant acetylcholine. So you still have a lot of nootropics in here. You're almost like doubling up on nootropics in comparison to the amount of caffeine that are in here. So it's a really focus aided kind of drink versus just an energy drink itself. You still get some caffeine to help out, which is sick. 5 calories, no fruit juice, of course. 1 gram of carbohydrates, no protein, no fat, and dietary fibers, zero. Total sugars is zero as well. The one cool thing about this is that you're cognizant that 250 milligrams is your second ingredient. So like that's one thing about Bum Energy is that it is a very, very clean energy drink. It's zero sugar. There's no artificial colors. There's no dyes. It comes through clear. And they've always taste great. They perform very well. But one thing that I love is they used to have this on there, and I don't know if there it is. They still have it on the bottom of the can. Just like Monster does, they have this little excerpt. So I feel like I got to read it. Wake up early and chase your greatness. Dream so big it scares you. The journey equals the reward, or progresses towards the reward. Expect less and hope more. You'll be happier. Take risks. The stories will be worth it. Love your mom so much you tattoo it on your arm. Life can be tough. Take it one day at a time. Don't be a bum. Drink Bum Energy, which they actually got in trouble when they first released it because it used to say "Don't be a bitch."
I do
um,
remember that vaguely.
yeah, that was like their first Bum Energy review is when they had that can. The second can that I'll be reviewing today. So I'm throwing in about 315 milligrams of caffeine plus an iced coffee. So like we're gonna
Got it
let it
all.
ride today. We're gonna let it ride today. But I have the NACO BCAA energy drink, which NACO stands for No Carbs Company. I have the cherry berry flavor. Now you see these a lot in Europe, and they're a great energy drink in my opinion. They usually taste really refreshing, have good flavors, but they've started to pop up in some different gas stations, particularly in the QT Quick Trip. They usually carry these, but I saw these in Vitamin Shop and I was like, I got to get my hands on one of them. They used to have like a Miami flavor that was really good, and then they had a grape one that was also nice. Cherry berry seems fun. The one thing that's weird about Naco is that their caffeine content kind of like randomizes with the flavors. Some of them might be 160, some 180, 170, 190, and this one is a 200 milligram energy drink, which is kind of sick. Now, it's not technically an energy drink, it is a sugar free and carbonated beverage. And the main piece of that is you do have 200 milligrams of caffeine, it's 10 calories. But what's really crazy about where the calories come from is it's zero fat, one carb, but 2 grams of protein in this. And that's because of the BCAA content. So protein isn't necessarily measured in grams. It's shown in grams on a can, but what happens is the nitrogen content is how they measure how much protein is in a drink or in a food. So the nitrogen content. Well, the amount of BCAAs, so L-leucine, you'll have some valine isoleucine in there, can up that actual nitrogen content in the drink. So that way it presents as 2 grams of protein. Now, I'm not saying this is a significant source of protein, but for no carbs, 2 grams of protein, probably a pretty good recovery drink, or at least an intra workout type of deal. And then you can supplement that with some funner stuff to have some carbs like fruit snacks, Sour Patch Kids, whatever you want. Yeah, all the good stuff.
Donuts.
Donuts, which I gave up donuts recently for the next 40 days. So not
Oh,
to
I forgot about
preach.
that Lent thing too.
Yeah.
Uh,
So, and it's bad because every time I go somewhere, there's like a special on donuts. So I'm like, you got to be kidding me. I gave
that's
up
how
the
it usually
wrong thing.
goes.
Yeah. But I'll let you go and then we'll pop these tops.
Yeah, man. So that kind of I've been big on the sparkling ice down here in the DR. That's like the national energy drink, so to say. But I found one of the tall cans of the sparkling ice. The traditional cans are usually only 70 milligrams of caffeine. But once in a while, you'll find these tall cans, so much like the Bum or like an Alani Nu Celsius, they come in these 12-ounce cans. And I think it's just a variation, but instead of only 70 milligrams of caffeine, it has 160. Um, has like a sticker on here because I bought it at the store, but as you can see there, it says 160. So I have the Berry Blast flavor. I think I found over my time here like three different flavors. The Berry Blast, there's like a fruit punch, and then there's like kind of like a mango tropical type of one. So this is the Berry Blast, zero sugars with vitamin and electrolytes, 10 calories, 3 grams of carbs, no fat, no protein. Got your random assortment of B vitamins and whatnot there, but 160 pretty good. And yeah, I've been able to find these a little bit more regularly lately, which is super nice. Also got some L-theanine in there, um, and the price is pretty good. It's interesting because these are actually a little bit pricier than the monsters. Still pretty
Really?
cheap. Like I think I said like it was 115 pesos, which to put that in perspective for Dominican pesos, I think it's about 60 to 62 pesos per American dollar. So really good actually. So White Monster is less than $2 here. I think these are closer to 150. So maybe a little bit over $2, maybe like 220, something like that. But still pretty cheap regardless. I think you'd probably pay more for these in the States, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I think I saw those at the grocery store. Those were about like 2.99 for us.
Yeah.
So a
So
little bit
still really
pricier.
cheap. Yeah, but still really cheap. 160, that's really nice. Yeah, excited for this one. I've had it before, but never on camera.
What I will say is I do, and I didn't mention these about the cans and like the look of them, but I like the look of those, like the slim cans for the ice. It reminds me of like the Fit Aid Energies. Like
Yeah,
it's super close in like the way that the color like palette kind of shifts on that like on the
it's like a
kind of gray.
gradient.
Yeah, I think it looks way cooler. So like they definitely for like the dedicated more quote unquote like energy one for them, they definitely kind of like went through. Um, Now I mentioned the can on the Bum Energy, but I didn't really like talk about the look of Nako. I think it's a sick can. It's so simplistic. Like it screams like Western Europe. Simple is beautiful. Like I think of like Finland, Sweden, Denmark, where they're like make it simple and just sleek. Um, I love like the jersey kind of lettering on top. They do the colored can on or the colored tab, just like Red Bull does, but they'll usually kind of
Yeah.
color their two slashes and then throw in like red on there for the flavoring.
Yep. This guy has a QR code that I just scanned to see what it is.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Oh, I think it's just like a survey. I probably won't
Survey
do that later.
says, "Show me potato salad."
Yeah, I'm not gonna take the time to do that right now, but yeah, should we pop these taps?
Let's pop these tops. I'm gonna double header this right here.
Ooh, wow.
Little vapor on both. Wow, that is two very distinct. This is screaming like great pop, and then the cherry is like what it reminds me of is a. It smells. It has like a little bit more like it's almost like cherry strawberry.
Hmm.
It reminds me of like the strawberry, like the actual strawberry Sour Patch Kids. That's what it smells like.
Yeah, that can is sick. I do like that.
Ooh. I like that way more than I thought I was gonna like that.
So the Naco slaps.
But man, if you like grape or like a grape crush, you will love the grape bum energy.
Ah,
Dude, I got so lucky. Like there's been times where we've deliberately gone out and been like, give me the worst energy drink, like Gridlock, or like Alani Nu. I'm like speaking of which, like if Alani Nu wants to do like a cherry flavor, they need to model it after this cherry berry. Like it's like it tastes like natural cherry, like tart cherry juice that it feels like it swirls into like a candy flavor, like how uh
kind of like
Gorilla
the.
Gorilla Mind.
You knew what I was gonna say. Yep,
Yeah,
like
dude.
the
I mean,
strawberry candy, watermelon candy.
it's like tart cherry juice that swirls into like strawberry candy from the Gorilla Mind.
That does sound really good.
And it's a very
This
clean, like both these are very clean, quote unquote, like energy drinks, like no artificial colors. Or there's some artificial coloring in this, but no artificial like true nasty flavors, mostly like natural flavoring. With a
yeah,
411 branched chain amino acid breakup with 3 grams of BCAAs. So I mean, like in a can, like that's normally
pretty
like you'll
solid.
see like 500 milligrams. Like this is pretty solid.
This bad boy isn't bad. It's a more like I would say it's like a more of a light flavor
Mm-hmm.
of like what you would get like it's berry burst. It's basically what it sounds like a mixed berry flavor. Not as
Kind
like sharp, but like it's pretty smooth. These are
like a Lacroix version of the Gorilla Mind mixed berry.
yeah, not quite as heavily carbonated, um, but nice and smooth. The taste is good. Like it's sweet still, but it's not like overbearingly sweet and not like overbearingly flavorful. I wish the flavor was a little more pungent, I guess if the word is correct. But it's still really solid. I think this or that tropical mango flavor is actually pretty solid. The fruit punch is all right. This is probably my favorite flavor of the I call them just ice on steroids. Not sure if there's other flavors that I haven't seen yet, but
The Anavar ices.
yeah, exactly. Oh, and it has a little thing on the side, as in life, chill for best results. I kind of like that.
Hell yeah.
But yeah, not bad.
The, we've talked about pricing on like the bum energy. Like it's about most of the time it's a little pricey,
Hmm.
like 319 for a 12-ounce can. The Naco was like 349 for a 12-ounce can. So if I'm giving Naco a knock, it's gonna be on pricing. But I mean, if this was a 299 drink, it would it would be phenomenal. But I'm gonna finish both of these before we give the reviews. But I mean, like solid work on flavoring.
Sick.
Um, there is a piece I wanted to get into with you, and shout out one of our current interns at Elon, Hank. You're a legend. Every once in a while, he's gonna just drop me a nugget and be like, "I want your opinion on this." And I gave my opinion to him, but I watched this video, and the video is essentially, you're not strong enough, or you're not ready to sprint fast. And at first, you're like, whoa, what do we got going on here? This is pretty like problematic, and you think it's going to go one way, but what he did is he kind of broke down like his KPIs of like why you're not sprinting faster, and it has to do with force production. And I do like some of these ideas on that. One of the biggest things that he brought into kind of brings into this first topic, and that is strength standards. 2x body weight squat. Are you prepared to then progress to jumps and plyometrics, etc.? But what I really liked about his was like he gave a range based off of like the movements, right? Squat pattern. And it was like 1.5 to 1 to 2x to 2.2 like squat of your body weight, depending on, is it front squat? Is it a split squat? Is it a back squat? But here's the kicker. And this is what I really liked about it and made me start to think about stuff. He gave you a speed with that where it's like, yeah, you can move that, but does it move quick? And he was like, so like for example, it was like a 1.75 body weight squat, I think on like a front squat, but it's got to move at zero point 0.6 to zero point 0.7 on like a speed range where it's not necessarily like I'm grinding that rep out, but like I'm moving it efficiently. Like, what are your opinions on associating like a VBT or a meters per second speed with that strength in order to have that be like more of a well-rounded strength standard, because it's no longer just like can we move absolute mass, but we can move it deliberately.
Yeah, that's interesting. I feel like I do like the idea of combining like percentages with VBT because a lot of times I think like percentages will get you in the ballpark and VBT is more like I want to say more reactive, but like it's more made for in the moment adjustments. Like, okay, it's moving fast, let's add weight. It's moving slow, let's stay here. I like it. Um, so it was a good one. I When you get to that point where you can lift, 2x body weight squat, and you have a guy that can not get it at the speed you want, are you going to hold them back from certain things? Is that kind of the premise of what he was doing? Like, until they can do this, they can't do this.
See, this is where it lost me a little bit on like the aspect of I don't want to withhold somebody from sprinting or jumping because they can't squat enough. A toddler is out here running as fast as they possibly can, jumping off the jungle gym into a deep squat like Jay Schroeder style, like and killing it. And they're 4 years old. I'm not going to say you're not ready to do this. Now, I might say we might have to do more general kind of strength stuff versus like getting weird and doing more quote unquote advanced methods. But what I like is the aspect of I'm thinking it in terms of if you're going to do testing, right? And instead of going through and say, we're going to just go for a 1RM and you kind of waste your day, maybe you start building and you're like, our goal is, zero point 0.8 seconds or 0.82 or 0.85, whatever it is. And you go through on that testing day and you're accumulating volume at that speed and adding weight and adding reps until you get there. Because then you're, just like we've talked about before, you're integrating the testing into the training session. So you're still getting required volumes. You're not wasting the day. But now you have a more like deliberate kind of metric that you're going for that's probably more applicable to the rest of what, the overall encompassing aspect of the sports performance of what you're trying to get done versus just I'm going to chase a strength number to chase a strength number. Maybe I want to see what's the top weight you can move at this speed, right? And then that's where you kind of pull, say, 1RM, 3RM, whatever it is, it's based on the speed at which you move. But I think I kind of like the idea. And I'm not going to be able to do that with any of my teams right now. We're in the spring, we're in season. No sense in doing that. When we get done with the season, they're immediately going off. Some of them are going to go compete internationally. Some are going to go back home and just train. But like I'm thinking like early fall, that's probably a way to do it if you want to get like a strength number. Say, hey, we're going to hook up some VBTs and we're going to go for it.
Yeah, I agree with you on the fact that I don't like holding people back from, if you read like the CSCS book, like you got to be able to do this to do plyos. Like I don't believe in that. Especially like kids, if they've done like if just living as a human and especially as an athlete, you're going to do that stuff in your sport. So not doing it in the training because you're not strong, quote unquote, strong enough is a bit ridiculous to me.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, you'll notice like you have people that are really weak but are really fast. And like part of that, a lot of that's just genetic. Like they just got a highly ramped up CNS that, they happen to pick the right parents. Now it doesn't mean that, we were talking about this actually, like, do you need to be strong to be fast? I'm like, well, no, because I see people come in that never train and they can run 20 plus miles an hour. But I can damn near guarantee you if we train them and they lift weights and they continue to sprint, they'll probably be a little bit faster.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so it's kind of it's good. It's interesting there. Now, is there a detriment to saying, okay, we are only doing our strength work if it moves at the speed and never exposing people to, those heavy grinding reps? Because, I was messing around on the force plates a couple weeks back, and I don't know if you've ever done this, Brian, but it's a really cool thing you can do with the Vault force decks is obviously like you'll do the counter movement jumps and your tests and usually have it on the iPad. But if you connect the force plates to like specifically a PC computer and download the Force Decks desktop app, you can do this thing called general force time analysis. And what that
Mm-hmm.
is, it's a really fancy way for a really simple thing. All it does is, because I mean, really, we talked about this before. All a force plate measured is force and time, and then everything else is a derivative of force and time. So it just basically shows you the force time curve. And like I was doing like back squats on the force plates and it was telling me, and I would do trap bar jumps on the force plates. You can literally lift on the force plates. And if I knew more about physics, I could probably figure out some more stuff. But the limited knowledge I do have, it's kind of cool to tell. Like the heavier weight will always have more. We were talking about this too. Like the heavier weight's going to have more force, but it's going to be in more time. A lighter weight is going to be less force, but it's going to be in less time. So they both produce power in their own unique way, if you will. So if you're only exposing athletes to heavy lifts that can only be moved at a certain velocity, and you're not touching those like grinding reps, like you said, that are like near that, like whatever the velocity zones say is the max strength, below zero point 0.5 meters per second, like a max. And they said for like a max squat, it was like zero point 0.3 or below or zero point 0.2 or below. I know it was a little bit different for bench and squat. Um, you're missing out on that, that maximal force production, if you will, and maximal motor unit recruitment. And you could argue like, because really the most force you're going to get is from an overcoming ISO. So you could just do
Yeah.
that instead. But are you missing out on something? Now, I like the premise, but I don't think you should just never do those grinding slow reps. But
Yeah.
on the other hand, it's like, yeah, testing days is a whole nother. We've talked about this before. Like, you kind of use your day for a testing day, and that's all you did.
I kind of think of this as, and I agree with you, to where you can't just never touch like a strenuous, high intensity, grinding kind of lift. And, you know, to kind of go off like the Maladen kind of like periodization stuff and sets and reps, like you got to do some grinding stuff and you have to do some ballistic stuff, right? Where you can't lose it is say like we'll never touch that. But I think what you
Mhm.
can do is use like this kind of premise in order to better well round like or get more use out of like some of those days or have a result that's a little bit more applicable. Where I like the idea of, hey, it's got to move at like say zero point 0.6 to zero point 0.7. We're going to max what we can get in that range, which a lot of the times in your training sessions, if you're not associating a percentage with the first set of whatever VBT to kind of match it and get them started, they spend all their warm up sets fighting their way to get there, right? So they're kind of figuring out what that is for that day. Whereas maybe in the fall or in the off season, I say fall for me, but in the off season, you're kind of working your way to preparing them for that. So they have that starting weight. And then it's like, all right, we're going to hit this. You're going to go for it. And whatever you cushion it at, say 0.8 to zero point 0.7, whatever it is, you can then do some back offsets and get a little bit more out of that day and still get a training adaptation. So they hit that little pyramid set of like building up, touching something super heavy or at least moderately heavy to heavier that's still moving kind of fast. And then you take that and back off and say, all right, we're going to hit some higher volume sets afterwards. That way we can kind of still get some training aspect out of this. I kind of like the idea, and I don't know if I'll use it in say a group setting, but I think in like a smaller training environment where like I have like some of the people who are post collegiates might do it with them where it's like we have a longer time, we're not limited by care hours, and a weight room schedule that you can only get in there for an hour. I think it's a good idea. It's something to keep in mind, and it's another wrench you can throw into the mix without really like saying like this is going to be the cornerstone of my program, but it's something I can use time and time again here and there to make sure that we're still touching on specific things that we need to in order to progress the adaptations that we want.
Yeah, I like that line of thinking. Yeah, I'm not going to try to go on a rant here because I feel like I need to think about it more. I don't want to just blabber on, but
You
yeah,
could.
you should. I mean, I could. Yeah, I mean, I feel like I need to watch this video myself.
I'll send it to you.
Um,
It's actually kind of neat, and there's a lot of stuff in the video I don't agree with, and like he's got like 20 different strength movements from a lateral lunge to everything else. It's like you're not testing all this. There's no way you can, and there's no way you should, right? In my opinion, my opinions are like assholes. Everybody's got one, but for me, like hit your basics and at least see that they can do that. In my opinion, again, integrate it into training, move along to the next thing so you can still address other aspects of the training. But
yeah,
there is some cool little nuggets that you can kind of steal. And this kind of leads to another point of like you can't copy every training program that you see, right? Someone might be a super big tier system person, someone might be a super big triphasic, or someone might be a super big Olympic versus non-Olympic kind of training person. You copy everything to a T. You not only copy any success, but you're going to copy every single failure too. The best strength coaches will bastardize something in order to fit it to their mold of what they need for their environment. And I think that's what you have to do when you go to read or approach new material is take what is applicable, what you do like, and try to formulate it so that way it works for you where you're at with your athletes and your weight room or your training system, and not disregard everything else, but you have to find new information that combats that ideology. And this is where like the growing happens is when you watch something and you don't agree with it, instead of just saying I don't agree with it, find evidence that doesn't support that, because then you start to learn more. Because at the end of the day, if you have a debate, you have a conversation, you have a talk, even if you don't agree with the other person when you're done, you've probably learned something enough about that to know why you shouldn't, or you learned a little bit more that might support that where you can start to think about it later.
yeah, that's a good point. And I mean, maybe that's part of the reason. I probably wouldn't do that with my population currently.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't really see I don't see a spot for VBT hardly at all with the guys I work with, unless it's just going to be like, okay, let's compete and see who can do the fastest for a trap bar jump or something like that.
At
And
like
that's
a
just me
standardized
personally.
weight.
Yeah, like that's just me personally right now. Maybe in a different context for sure, but it's also like goes back to that thing. You should always be trying to get stronger and move the bar as fast as possible. So over time, if you're getting stronger, you're probably moving those submaximal weights at a faster rate than you were before. And I think a lot of people overlook like, yes, there's a diminishing return on strength, but I don't think a lot of people get there super often. Um, I think like a 2x body weight squat. I think I read something the other day. It was like a 2.2 is when it started like diminishing. That's like pretty. If you're a 200-pound guy, like you're gonna squat 450 and then have it drop off. Like how many people are getting there, especially
That's
outside of American football or rugby or like wrestling, like people that are really like big, strong, physical dudes. Maybe some baseball players, but
that's up there.
yeah, it's up there. And that doesn't mean you're just only focusing on that, but the simple stuff can get you pretty far there. And I do like the
Mm-hmm.
point you brought up about just like trying to play devil's advocate to your own ideas. Like there's a good quote, I can't remember who said it, but it's like we question all of our beliefs except for those we truly believe in and those we never think to question. So that's
Oh, that's a banger.
Yeah, I think
Clip that.
I didn't say that, but yeah, that's a really good one. Like trying to find information that goes against what you think is something that I think all of us probably don't do enough. Like, oh, like I think this is stupid. Okay, there's probably research that says it's not. There's probably research that says it is too, which is why you can't just only like you got to have form your own opinion too. And I think anecdotal evidence is underrated in my opinion. You know,
Hmm.
I'm reading. You mentioned Mladen. I'm reading Agile Periodization Volume One again right now, and he talks about like how people just say, "Oh, that's not scientifically proven." It's kind of like basically like a cop out because to be honest, like it's all kind of a big. We're still guessing a lot, and there's a lot of stuff we don't know. And in research, all the big money is probably going to like more important things like how to cure cancer and like disease and stuff like that. And the leftovers are going to like fitness and sports performance researchers. So at the end of the day, you have to think critically of yourself. Yeah, you're going to use the research. Yeah, you're going to use like your context with your resources and constraints. But it's okay to have a different thought process and a different opinion on why this works and this doesn't, or why something works and it doesn't than the other person, and they might both be correct, and that's fine. That's where I think we sometimes we kind of miss the boat.
I agree, and I think that's one of the big things is about like the anecdotal evidence is that a lot of research is done based off of funding, right? You know, I've been researching like a PhD, and it's like, how do you get that funded? Well, you do research that will support a corporation who has a lot of money, what they want, right? So some people, like in the realm of like sports, it's like a lot of times it's either nutrition based or like a purchasable thing kind of based. Excuse me. So it's like Nike sponsors some PhDs if your research is in footwear technology, right?
Mm-hmm.
People aren't doing a ton of research who can because they probably can't afford it, and research is expensive. It's a lot of work. You can't really do that a lot on stuff that you're just truly passionate about because it's hard to find that funding for stuff like that.
Well, and I also think like just because it's not published in a journal, if you're paying attention to like I think like with our experimentation with ourselves and with our athletes, we're doing our own type of research. It's just not, it might be shunned by people in white lab coats that do like real clinical research. But
Mm-hmm.
if you have your intervention, which is the program you're running, and it's it's, can't even say it's specific to your environment. It is your environment. It's the most specific thing you could be doing. And then you see the outcome and then you reiterate from there. That's the coach's version of research that is probably a lot more applicable than any of the studies that you're going to look at because it's specific to your your specific weight room, your facilities, your time constraints, your athletes that you're dealing with at that time. That's research. That's just another type of research to me.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
And that's how I think you got to look at it. You can't wait. I've been digging into some Charles Poliquin stuff too, and that was his big thing. Like I'm ahead of the curve. Like if I wait until the research comes out, like I wasted 10 Olympics, and like this stuff comes out this year. I've been doing that since the '80s, this and that, and like say what you will about him, but like he's got the results to back it up. Unfortunately, he passed away, but he had he coached a lot of Olympians. Um, I mean, say what you want about him, but you've probably heard of him. You probably know the name.
Anyone who's done a Poliquin complex or looked at that or looked at just some hypertrophy training too, like
Yes,
they
Poliquin
see it.
principles, baby.
He's got it. And
Hmm.
it's across from Olympians to just straight up bodybuilders. The guy knew his stuff. Um, Speaking of big names in S&C, one thing that we haven't really talked about, and it's been I realized this when I was like sitting down the other day. We've talked about any of like the cliche kind of like arguments, Olympic list versus non, do you back squat? Do you look the part? Stuff like that. You know what's one thing we haven't talked about on the podcast that we've had a conversation about how many times when you were in office with me,
What's that?
do you jump and stick or do you go extensive to intensive to shock? Plyometrics, baby. We haven't really touched on that in totality, right? And a lot of different ways and a lot of different reasonings for each side of the training. I know a lot of baseball guys who are big jump and stick. I know a lot of other guys who go the complete other way, right? And there's an argument for both sides. I get it. I'm on one side, but I want to hear your opinion.
Yeah. So you're let me just get this straight. People
Mm-hmm.
that only do the extensive to intensive to shock, and people that just do jump and stick. Pros and
Mm-hmm.
cons. Okay. It's one of those other things like you don't have to pick one side or the other. You can do both.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think now I'm obviously biased and influenced by my training through Simpson and Elon that were probably a little bit bigger on the start with more extensive, then move to more intensive, and then move to shock. But I think they can and should probably all be in a program at all times to some extent. Like you can't just not do any intensive plyos
Mm-hmm.
for months on end and then expect to have the best results, in my opinion. And that doesn't mean like because people forget like if you're sprinting, that's a pretty intensive plyo right there. You could probably even call it a shock. It's repeated one right after another. Yeah, I think you can. I think there's time for both. For baseball specifically, I think the you said the jump and stick is a little more popular. Snap down progressions are I feel like a little more popular in baseball. I've seen them done in football as well, but
Mm-hmm.
I think just a simplistic view, like you're not going to jump right to max strength work. You're probably going to do, if you have time, a little bit of GPP. The intensive plyos are like GPP for intensive plyos. Um, so I'm probably more in favor of that. But I mean, like I said, you don't always have to pick one. What do you think about that?
This is where I'm gonna get finicky with terminology, right? I think of like a jump as like a single effort, and now jumps can be just point blank a bilateral takeoff to a bilateral stick, right, or a bilateral landing. But I think of like a plyometric, it's bleeding contacts together in order to overload the stretch shortening cycle. I put jumps in one category, plyos in the other. I'm going to do, like, if I have jumps in the training session, then I have single efforts. If I have, if I have plyometrics, right, I'm probably going extensive to intensive to shock, right? And the shock can inherently just be, a jump. Like it's one of those things that it looks like a DNA strain where it just continues to do this, you know, and kind of woven together. I'm a big fan of the extensive to intensive to shock, mainly from the aspect of number one, it's like rhythm and coordination, motor learning. Like a lot of those like easier ones where kids can't probably like stick as well, they can learn in sub maximal intensities and get a lot out of it. And then as they become more coordinated, you intensify that just like you would progressing like the loading on a traditional lift. Big fan. Once they become that and the juice isn't coming out as much as you want on like the intense stuff, then it's like we should do some shock stuff where we overload the stretch shortening cycle, whether that be dropping off something into a bigger effort, bleeding really intense reps together, you know, whatever that might be. I'm what I don't like in where what I don't like essentially is like when we go like, hey, we're gonna go one broad jump, or we're gonna take what would be essentially a intense plyometric, and we're going to add that stick in just for the sake of adding a stick. Like I hate seeing like and I call them hurdle hops. I know it's not a hop, but the alliteration to it makes me happy in my brain. It tickles something in my brain. But like a hurdle
Yeah.
jump,
Yeah, you're jumping over the hurdle. I call them
yeah,
hurdle hops too.
yeah.
Don't feel
But
bad.
like, okay,
Don't feel
where you,
bad.
where you got 4 hurdles, and what you really want is like big hip flexion, a lot of height, rebound off the ground, and we're like, instead, let's
Completely
stop.
stop.
Let's completely stop. Kill all momentum. Like, I don't want that. It looks ugly. We're wasting a lot of time. I think we lose what it is. And if that's the case, I would just have you jump 4 times as high as you can and pause in between them. Right. I think we're making it more complex for the sake of making it more complex to make it look like what we're doing is a lot more than what it is. Whereas if I want to add that piece, I'm gonna make sure I get the most out of that piece on purpose instead of like just doing something to do something. And I think that's like my big issue.
Yeah. This goes into like progressions and regressions too. Like,
Mm-hmm.
are you someone that's super strict about like it has to be from static to dynamic with like, the hurdle jumps, static, dynamic with a little burst at the end, stuff like that. Um, Now, to caveat that, does that mean you never do stuff that involves no momentum, like a squat jump where you're not doing the counter movement, but you're saying there's just a better way to do that? That's more of a single response thing for you, single response, full recovery instead of stopping between each hurdle. Is that what I'm
Yeah.
understanding? Okay.
Yeah. So like
Because I
I
think
also
that's important too. Like, I don't know, I haven't read the book Strength Deficit, but I think if you
I
have,
yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
So like I look at it too as like I think of like a skater squat broad jump, right? Where or like a
dead
rear foot
stop,
elevator. You're dead stop, right? The whole point is that it's truly a non-counter movement, no stretch shortening cycle,
just
force
concentric.
dom force dominant concentric movement into that like landing. But then at the same time, you could also just make it a counter movement and increase the eccentric force that comes down and that loading, and you're probably going to get a higher output. But then it's like, are we chasing the output, or are we chasing like a muscular adaptation where we don't want necessarily any risk of soreness post XYZ? Whereas if you limit the eccentric stress, you're going to limit the soreness.
Yeah.
It becomes very like knowing more about each movements and what you're doing and why you're doing them makes your decisions easier versus just saying, I want to do this because it looks cool, or I want to do this because I want to do a jump, or etc. Like having the you should reach the over piece of the bell curve to where you're like so enlightened that you have all this information that you walk all the way back to the very beginning of the bell curve and you just like,
The
does
simple
that
stuff
matter?
works.
The simple stuff
Yeah.
works.
The
Yeah.
simple stuff works, but now you know why it works and you know why the other stuff maybe doesn't work as well. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
that's a really good point. I think the rhythm and coordination piece that you were speaking on with the extensive stuff is super important. I'm thinking especially with the guys that I work with, like some of them are pretty coordinated, some of them not so much. It's like you can't even do like a skip without looking like a newborn deer. We probably need like is it doing a whole lot to do like a bunch of extensive or shock method plyos when they can do that? Probably not. They probably need more extensive, whether that's just body weight jumps or maybe submaximal weight loaded jumps, stuff like that. Um, Now, are you considering, I guess we can't really consider like an altitude drop where most people will tell you to stick the landing a plyometric because you're not really using that stretch shortening cycle. You're just,
You're producing the eccentric force.
yes, you're not, unless you're doing a depth jump or a drop jump. That's a
See, but
different
here's
exercise.
but this goes back to the other question of why just do one thing and become X guy or become X coach? This stuff has to intertwine and be used together, because then you have movements like that where it's like, well, which one do I categorize it as? Like that's the thing.
Yeah. Speaking to that, I just got to this point in the book Agile Periodization where he's talking about like classifying exercises and basically like the precision versus significance. Like you can be super precise and have, 60 different exercise categories, and maybe you do, and maybe that works for you. But is it actually applicable? Like he talks about like place of things versus forum for action. Does the way you classify stuff and integrate it into your program make it easier to make decisions for you versus just being super technical and being all like splitting hairs on which category this exercise goes into versus, okay, do we do this? When do we do it? At what time? What volume? Like simple stuff like that that actually matters when doing a program, making a program. If you want to do that, then that's maybe like that's what coaches need. That's what coaches need. If we want to split hairs and be like, okay, categorize stuff, maybe that's more of like research based. No, I just talked about how coaches do research too, but hopefully you catch my drift there.
Mm-hmm. And I think like the ease of decision making, right? That kind of goes back, like I mentioned, of like knowing so much that you go back to the simple stuff where your decision making process when you're creating a program or say auditing it, whatever it is, or just selecting the modalities of what you're trying to chase. Like you should, when you have that much knowledge built up, your decision making process is very quick. It's very much like the Malcolm Gladwell, like don't blink, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like making instantaneous, fully thought out decisions just in a moment because right there, like you have enough knowledge based up that you're like, I can refer back without having to do a ton of research because I've done all that research prior. Also, great book, Don't Blink by Malcolm Gladwell. Anything Malcolm Gladwell puts out, like I suggest any coach, any person who is a leader in whatever field you're in, whether you're a banker, whether you're, in development, whatever it is, read Malcolm Gladwell because those are like, if they're not self-help books, they're like thought process books and they're
Yeah,
sick,
I haven't read any of his books. I need to honestly. Need to go on PDF Drive and see if I can get some of them for free here.
right? Scribed, this is just not a, I mean, that's a shameless plug. They are not a sponsor, but they got some nice stuff on there.
Yeah, I'm all about the free books. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
that's a good point. That's a good point.
Yeah, I mean that was like those are like the big kind of topics that I had for us based on that aspect. I know you said you had a couple that you wanted to talk about.
Yeah, so going off the plyometrics thing, how are you? Is your thought process similar with like a loaded jump as well? Obviously, it's tough to do like the because it's tough to do loaded jumps and like all the vectors. Like you're not going to do probably a broad
Hmm.
jump with two dumbbells in your hand. But
Hmm.
is the thought process change at all for that for you?
A little bit. When it comes to loading, I think about like where you're loading it, and that kind of like will influence the decision making process, right? Is it axial loading? If it's axial loading, like you're putting a barbell on the back, then I'm like, let's go. In my opinion, I want to go slow to fast versus light to heavy. I want to go slow to fast, and that's okay. So after an introductory period, start at like whatever your heaviest kind of like weight is, and slowly work down to speed because the speed going up with the speed coming down, more than likely that'll impact a little bit more on the spine, just because like essentially a super heavy like squat jump is almost just like a speed squat because you're probably not getting off the ground as much. Whereas like that gravity coming into play is probably going to amplify the forces coming down on you, even if we look at it registering on like a force plate. If you're doing it on a force plate, your forces probably are quote unquote like higher, but like when it's not necessarily, I mean it is, but is it really taking gravity into effect of like if the bar separates from the shoulders based off the speed at which you're flying, and then now you don't have like the natural like bracing to cushion it, but now you have impact. um so that's a piece to that as well. And then as I get lighter, then I'm going to start to probably work my way back up that chain with repeatable jumps. So like now that I've gotten to this fastest one, I'm going to load it fast for repeat jumps, and then I'll load a little heavier for repeat jumps, so on and so forth. So that's one of those things. Um, and then like I look at it in the term of like, are we loading with a dumbbell if we're doing like a broad jump, or like a lateral broad jump? Probably not. You're probably loading with like a band or a cable system. If we can get like solid look, and this is where your coaching eye comes into play. If it looks solid and we can stick that landing when we're resisted in in that vector, well then I can start to build repeats. And that one's a little bit more of like less structured, of more of like a, when I see it, I'll know. But that would be me. Whereas like say like a trap bar jump, it's I'm not a huge fan of the non counter movement trap bar jump unless like someone has like a back issue, which inherently at that point I'm probably not going to do a trap bar jump anyway. I might do something different, but I'll probably work from like a trap bar pull to a counter movement trap bar jump to a repeat effort trap bar jump. Um, so kind of like changing the movements itself versus like just doing like a non counter movement trap bar jump.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Good stuff. Good stuff. There was a video I watched the other day, um, and it talked about how this guy had the take that Nordic curls cause more hamstring injuries than they quote unquote save, which is I don't even want to say
Yeah.
save, because if it's preventative, like the thing about like being trying to be preventative is that you don't always know what you're preventing, and if it never happens, like you don't always like know what you were preventing, but that doesn't mean you
Mm-hmm.
don't do it, obviously. But he basically was like, like Nordic curls, like they say it's like the best like weight room exercise you can do for, bulletproofing the hamstrings. Obviously you sprint, but like the way that, it's eccentric overload, and most people get injured during the eccentric phase of the sprint. And his take on it was it's a ton of eccentric stress, and at the end of the day it all comes down to workload, and people usually say, oh, like I'm sprinting, I need to do stuff to other stuff to protect my hamstrings, and then they add in a bunch of Nordics and they get hurt because they had too much and their workload's all fucked up. um, and there was another thing about like I know there was a big meta-analysis that looked at Nordic curl, like Nordics on injury prevention, but then there was some stuff about like the guy who ran it like worked for Vald, which sells Nordboards, so that kind of put a little twist into that. But what do you think about that? Because I mean, preventative, quote unquote, preventative exercises, I feel like in total everything we do is ideally preventative. Like we're obviously pursuing upside, but we're also trying to protect from the downside. And we talked about this, like the weight room is a very controlled environment compared to sport, um, but Nordic curls especially, or anything for that matter, really.
Yeah. So I guess like to start like along the lines of like Nordics, I agree. Nordics probably cause more issues than they solve in totality. The main reason being, again, it's super maximal eccentric. They're really hard to progress or regress just from the sake of like, right, like if I do a regression, if say I'm doing like say like a razor curl or a GHR, it's not the same movement because we're not loading nearly as much in a long lever based off of like the lever classifications of where we're truly pinpointing the most maximal force on that joint and on that muscular tissue. Second, you can either kind of do it or you can't, right? So like you'll play with the time under tension. Hey, I need you to try and resist it for 4 seconds, 5 seconds, etc. Or maybe you put a band on it. But as the thing is like the band isn't always going to be consistent. Number one, as you kind of move down that curve, and as you get longer, the band's obviously helping you. So it's just really like your strength curve on that is not the same as it necessarily would be on like a hamstring curl, whether it be seated or laying. Not a big fan in that aspect. You can't go to really single leg. If you can do a single leg Nordic, you're insane. Like that's beyond belief. And then it's like, well, you can do a Nordic. When what do we do now? Well, now I'm going to try to get you back up versus just the extension aspect. Great. You can probably get one or two of them, and you're probably 1 out of 10 athletes, maybe even less. Awesome, right? And the eccentric portion is so tough. Whereas like you might get a cramp on the concentric portion, but this is where I like you think of like the Archuleta curls, where you can load somebody up, put them in a Nordic position at the very bottom, and just depending on a pad height or whatever, you have them pull the concentric portion out, right? Well, now you can slowly scale that as maybe you have 2-inch pads. You pull a pad away the next time, you complete 3 reps. The next time you come in, we're going to try and pull a pad away. If we can't pull a pad away and get one, well, then you're going to hit 4 reps, so on and so forth. It's more scalable. It probably does a lot more for the hamstring in the sense of the contraction, where I think a lot of people, most injuries occur during the eccentric phase, like you said, in sprinting. However, I think it's weakened by the prior concentric or prior eccentric phase that builds up to that on the workload side, right? Nothing is inherently good or bad, but unfortunately, like in a very time intensive aspect, in a lack of scalability, in the aspect of like you're probably increasing extreme amounts that aren't necessarily super measurable other than like an educated guess without a force plate, but you're not going to put a force plate at every single rack and have the kids do, or a Nord board and have the kids do their Nordics on there. If I had to make a decision on it, it's like, yeah, I'm probably out. I'll have you hit some razors. I'll have you hit some hamstring curls. I'll have you do XYZ instead. And Mike Wadango, like he even said, like, other than like a hamstring curl or something like that, like he's barely even RDLing from more towards the hip side. He's going to load up a heavy glute bridge because you have knee flexion and hip extension flexion, right? You can probably get a lot of work done in there. And yeah, that's a lot of setup too, depending on how you have to set it up. But I think there's other things that we can be doing and get a lot more out of, and bank on the fact that the next day we might not send them in and have to kind of be biting our nails and gritting our teeth of like, I hope they make it through this.
Yeah.
Now, I think personally, I like doing them. I think they're fun, but I also like, for me, I'm not worried if I get hurt. If I get hurt, it's cool. If I
Yeah.
hurt a kid and now like that season's done, vastly different story. General population, you can probably rip some Nordics and be fine. But when you add the chaos of like sport practice, competitions, there's so much unpredictability. You're probably better off taking a different modality and attacking it from a different direction.
Yeah. I mean, I agree. Like, obviously, it all comes down to workload. Like, it's kind of an obvious point. Like, if you just do a ton of shit, no matter what exercise you do, like you could say, oh, but that's not really the exercise itself. It's more
Mm-hmm.
so the overall. You might point fingers, but and I think the dosage comes in too. Like I think of Gabe and like just kind of how we introduced like and kept Nordic variations in at Elon, and I feel like you got to introduce them before the season, and then if you just keep that even a low dose in, whether it's like that GHR Razor Nordic complex or just a variation of a Nordic, and kind of take the microdosed approach, you'll be fine. Um, but don't think you're going to hit 3 sets of 6 on Nordics and not probably increase that risk of having a little tweak. Yeah. Oh, another thing I just thought of. What is your opinion on band assisted jumps? I know people. I know I've seen you use them before.
Mm-hmm.
I know some people, and like I've used them before. I know some people say like, oh, like what's the point? Because it's like, oh, like it's like overspeed training for jumps, but like, what's the point? Like, you're not getting the full like force when you're landing. What's your take on them? Why do you use them?
Couple reasons, and I'll start off by saying like everyone says like, oh, it it decreases like the eccentric landing forces. I really don't think so, just because while you have the band tension at the bottom, you're probably jumping higher. So you're probably negating some of that right there. Does it probably pull some away? Probably. What I really like, and this is going to make some people mad, but like we do increase the takeoff velocity on a lot of them, but they're a fun way for a lot of kids to get high up in the air and experience that. And I can get some more effort out of plyometrics, and I can remove some of the hands in that aspect because I like to have them like locked in like this rack kind of position. Sometimes it's okay to do training methods that are just fun, right? When a training environment is fun, it gets competitive. I can build in probably 12 to 16 more jumps in that aspect and increase my volume on my plyos. And kids get a lot of enjoyment out of it. They think it's awesome. I don't think that's a bad reason. I still think I get high intensity, high intent, and they have a blast doing it. Sick. Great. Now instead of making me do four other different ways, I throw those in there. And what's the cost to me? Maybe I can't measure it as much, but we're getting a lot of intent out of it. And we're getting the knee bend, we're getting the hip to flex, and we're getting a lot of a high speed like plyometrics. Is that a good answer? Maybe, maybe not. Do I care? No, I absolutely don't give a shit.
Yeah, no, they are fun as hell. Like, I remember I did I was when I was working with the like men's gymnastics team at Simpson. The coach saw us doing those. He's like, "Oh, like you should call these like moon bounces or something like that." And I was like, "Yeah, they are fun though. Those and do the same thing with like a push up where you put a band and like a almost like a backpack strap for like a plyo push up and just um with a rack. That type of stuff. That type of stuff
Mm-hmm.
is fun for sure. Yeah, I was just curious.
If you Yeah, like if you can get the same adaptation in a way that's probably a little bit more engaging for some of the athletes, I would probably spend the extra 30 seconds setting up and have the higher engagement level than something that works relatively the same, whether it be small margins, just to make sure that like, hey, they come in like my athletes when I come in and I get this lift set up and I see them walk through the door, they see the bands up there, they're like, oh, we got that today, here we go. They're ready, they're excited to train, they bring a little bit more intensity, the environment's a little bit better. So like even if I just say, hey, you're going to do those and then you're going to walk over and hit your testing metric on the plyomat, cool. Well, now they're riding high. They feel like they just jumped super high in the air. Like the psychological aspect does play a role, whether you want to admit it or not. It does. It doesn't always have to be just purely research backed scientific things. Just like you said, the anecdotal evidence works. When I put those in a program, my jumps do happen to be a little bit higher on average. I don't know if it's just from the act of being in the air longer and like like the overspeed of like we expose them to a higher jump, they're likely to hit a higher jump. No, they're probably smiling, having fun, feeling like they just floated in the air in zero gravity, and they're bringing that into the next piece. That's okay. Dudes need to realize that's okay. Have some fun with this. We work in a gym and we wear sweats for a living.
Yeah, that's a really good point. One more thing before we get some ratings on these drinks. Is actually an idea
Mm-hmm.
I had for an Instagram post. Probably be a lot better after I talk to you about it. Exercises that do two things, and by that I mean like okay, I feel like you'll see this more in the personal training or like sports specific type of realm. Like okay, I'm gonna do like a step up to a bicep curl to a shoulder press or something like that. Exercises where a lot of people would probably say like you're doing two things shitty instead of just separating them into different exercises and doing them better, which I do agree with, but
Mm-hmm.
I was rethinking that and like where they might actually have a place. And to me, I think for general population, they do have a place because if you're crunched on time and need to do a freaking reverse lunge to like a bicep curl, yeah, you're always going to be able to reverse lunge more than you can bicep curl unless you're very asymmetrical. But if you're just using that to
Mm-hmm.
like burn calories and like just need to do something quick, that could be useful. But I'm thinking for like our setting, is there a situation where that type of stuff fits in with a program because of the time constraints? Like I'm thinking I was doing some supine hip flexion on a cable. So I was laying on my back, basically put the cable around my ankle and just bring in my knee towards my chest towards the end of my workout. And I was like, well, and I was gonna do a hamstring iso, like a single leg hamstring iso later, like to I was gonna do them separate. And I'm like, well, couldn't I do the hamstring iso while I'm doing the cable? I might not like I could do that or turn it into like an iso for both. Is that a situation where that fits in because it just saves a little bit of time? That's not one of your big rocks regardless, and it probably increases the difficulty and just gets more density in. I'm thinking stuff like that, or if you're training, if you do a full body split and we're doing a split squat iso, and you want to do something for shoulder health, we'll call it isometric bicep curl. I know that sounds so bro, but the bicep tendon is important for a lot of things. What do you think about that? Is there a place? Because I feel like before I thought about that, I was kind of like if you're gonna do two things in once and do them subpar, you might as well split them into different movements and get more out of them versus just doing a shitty version of the combination of the two. But from thinking of that, I think with like lower stakes movements that usually are placed towards the end of the workout, they still have importance, but obviously most of the time you're going to place your big rocks, the stuff that's more important, higher outputs toward the beginning. Can you combine some of those and not sacrifice or even maybe get more out of those?
Yeah. So this goes back, and again, mentioned Godango before, but like Mike Godango, he had a good one on like why he does an Olympic lift, and not to like beat an absolutely dead horse to smithereens here, but he was like, it's a quasi RDL with a quasi shrug with a quasi front squat, right? That's why he breaks them up. And it's like to support your argument of like, if you're going to do, two things at the same time and kind of do them shitty, like why not break it up and get more out of it? I agree to a certain extent. Now, there's an argument on the flip side of like, well, I want the rhythm and coordination aspect. And I think that's a huge thing, right? Whereas I think of like, in the sake of like supporting the Olympic lift in this sense, now that I just shit on it, like I think of like a thrower, and a thrower has to move an external implement that's heavy, and they have to move it with rhythm and coordination at a certain speed in order to make sure that everything moves together fluidly. That supports that argument in a different aspect, right? Versus like I'm doing this for just power output and power development, right? And then I think of like our accessory lifts, right? And I do this a lot with like cross country, in the aspect of like they have a low training age, they probably need coordination, and it's going to be one of those like motor learning kind of pieces where it's like maybe I'll have like a single arm row with like a band or a cable mixed with a lateral lunge, but now I want those two things to move together at the same time. They're not necessarily always asked to do weird multiplanar motions where two things have to do, like pat your head and rub your stomach. The people who can do that are typically going to have that motor learning aspect to it. So yeah, I'm gonna mix things up like that. I've had one where we get into a glute bridge, pop into like an A position with one leg, so it's like a single leg glute bridge, and then I'm gonna have you now do a calf raise. Right now, it's not necessarily an upper body, lower body kind of movement, but we're doing two things at the same time. We're ripping through the glute and we're working through that bent flex knee. So now I'm probably getting after that soleus a little bit. Those are okay. I think these are all okay as long as you know like what you're doing and why you're doing it and have a truly like driven purpose for doing that. I don't necessarily think it's the wrong thing. Where I find the problem is like when it's just like we're doing it because this is like sport specific or XYZ, right? If you're like, hey, I'm crunched on time, I need him to get some overhead pressing, so I'm gonna have him walking lunge or a step up with an overhead press, right?
Yeah,
Or
because you're always going to be underloading one movement in
mm-hmm.
that case. So you're always going to be underloading one movement or overloading one movement. Like it's going to be
Yeah.
very asymmetrical.
And sometimes you're like, I want to purposely underload the movement because I need them to go through like the knee flexion but maybe I don't need to absolutely torch their lower body right now. So this is a way to hide the fact that I'm not having them push too much, right? Whatever it might be. I think those are okay. I think it's a good idea. Like when you rip like a weighted sit up on like a GHR with like a plate to an overhead press, right? I'm getting some
Hmm.
shoulder stuff and I'm probably maybe overloading the GHR a little bit. I think it's okay. You just need to know when, why, and how you're going to do it and like have that purpose because someone's going to have a problem with it and you need to be able to defend it. And you're not just doing it for the sake of like, I'm doing a weird movement to be different. And this is what I saw on Instagram, this or that, right? Just if you're intentional with how you're programming it and you make sure that the athletes are intentional with how they move it, I think you'll be able to get away with it. Not only get away with it, but you'll probably be pretty successful with it as well.
Yeah, and in some cases it could even be
Except for a
like a
standing landmine overhead press.
I won't say the name that I'm thinking right now. It it can be like a progression in a sense too. Like if you do like my primary example, like a single leg hamstring ISO with okay, we get in that A position. Now we get in that A position with a little bit of load from a band or a cable. Um, you go from a chest supported IYT to an IYT. You go up with a back extension and then do it from there. It's a little bit harder.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I forgot what I was going to say. Oh, I was going to touch on, just got done reading the book The System, and they talk a lot about like complexes, like integrating complexes for like the Javoric complex for like their
Mm-hmm.
GPP stuff. And like, yeah, with a complex, it's unlikely that, if you're doing upper and lower body movements in the same complex, you're probably going to be either overloading the upper body or underloading the lower body. But if you're doing it for a warm up or for, GPP purposes, maybe that's your like before you get into your heavy main movement, you're doing that as like a full body type of warm up and you just want some rhythm and coordination. I think that's where those things can have a place. So,
Yeah. Do you want to give? I'm sorry, like these drinks are getting to me. I have to go. I'm gonna Joe Rogan you, and I'm like, I gotta piss right now.
yeah,
Start
I'll
start
go
start ripping
over.
yours, and I'll
Yeah,
I'll, I'll be back in like 36 seconds. But this is
yeah.
I've been I gotta race. I gotta race like a piss horse.
Okay. Do your thing, dog. Yeah, so four, I gassed this whole thing. Um, Sparkling ice energy, berry blast flavor. Like I said, it's just like a mixed berry type of flavor, pretty lighter on the carbonation. Still a good taste, but I wish it was a little more pungent. I wish it was a little more packed with flavor. The price, really cheap, less than, I would say, just a little over $2. So pretty good, especially for down here. 154 Dominican pesos if you really want to get down to the nitty gritty. The can looks really nice. The top is pretty boring. I would say overall, especially for down here, this is probably like an 8.5. The White Monster has my heart in the DR just because like obviously the White Monster is goaded regardless. But to find it down here for super cheap, these are a little bit more expensive actually. But I'll give this like an 8.5. Like it's nice, smooth energy for the most part. 160 milligrams is really solid. I feel like that 150 to 200 mark is kind of my sweet spot for like an energy drink. Unless I'm really trying to redline my shit, I'll just go for a rain or I would say a bang, but I don't really go for a bang anymore. Like a rain. But yeah, overall, pretty solid drink. Would wouldn't be like my primary choice if like I'm in the States and I have like a whole assorted selection. But if you're looking to try something a little bit different and if you like the ice energy, I know they have their regular flavored water. If you're really into those and you want something that's going to give you a little bit of a caffeine buzz, maybe you try one of these or maybe one of their other flavors that they have in the 70 milligram, if you just want something really light. But yeah, I'd give it like a solid 8.5 for the DR if I'm in the States and probably give it like probably around like a 6.7 to maybe a 7. But yeah, and perfect timing because Brian just got back.
All 36 ounces from the coffee and the energy drinks, I think, just came out.
Yep.
So
Gram of caffeine in Brian's toilet.
it's insane. Yeah, going through here, I'll start with the Bum Energy. Love the purple. Love the like the cream colored, like that old school. Again, it just makes me mad they went away from the stubby cans. Those were so sick. It was completely non-traditional. Nobody was doing it, and now we kind of look like the same can that everybody else has got in the sense of the instance of the shape, and it just upsets me. I understand it's probably like a supply chain thing, and it helps out, and they could mass produce a little bit more. I don't like it. Um, Ingredients wise, it's very low on caffeine. It's 112 milligrams. I understand why, but the nootropics definitely make up for that. Flavor, incredible. You want a grape crush? This is it. This is a higher caffeinated with nootropic grape crush. Price wise, a little expensive, towards that like 319 in terms for the caffeine. But I think if you take it for what it's worth, it's going to be killer. I would probably give the grape Bum Energy an 8.6. I think it's incredible. I would probably rip a case of these and drink one every day and replace like, a daily energy drink unless I needed something more with this based off of just flavor alone. I think it's the second best grape energy drink I've had behind the Welch's Ghost, which also has a new kind of remodeled can. Now for the Naco. I love this way more than I thought I was going to love this. It's outstanding. This is another one. Naco comes through. If it was a little bit cheaper, it could be a daily driver. Absolutely solid flavor. 200 milligrams of caffeine, 3 grams of BCAAs in here, which we've talked about BCAAs before. Are they that important if you're taking your daily protein intake? Who knows? I don't know, but they're in there and they're willing to put their money where their mouth is in terms of adding legit ingredients into that piece. Flavor's impeccable. I love it. Like I said, it's like a natural, like dark cherry juice, and then it flips right into like that strawberry candy kind of Gorilla Mine like aftertaste. Like it doesn't taste chemically. It definitely tastes more like a natural flavor, or like a natural candy, which I do like. Can looks super sick. They have the Naco on the back. Like it is more of like I said, like a more European kind of style on the can of like the fitness or like a CrossFit kind of brand where it really takes itself official. But it's super, they have the cartoon cherries on there. It's fun. You bring this in there and I'm like, yeah, this dude kind of know, like you bring this into a gym. I'm like, they know energy drinks. Like they're serious about this. Guy knows ball. California company, but obviously produced in the Netherlands. So there you go. If it wasn't for the price being at like $3.99, being a little bit higher, I think this would have a higher score. But due to that, I'm going to go 8.3. 8.3 on the Naco. I think it's incredible. This would be something, like I said, if you could get a case for, $30, 32, I'd buy a case. I'd drive one daily. That would be great. I'm a big fan, and I hope to see them kind of spread their wings and fly across a little bit more availability in America because they're solid. They kind of blew my doors off with this one. I did not think I was going to like the cherry berry so much. I took this one being like, Naco's a good brand, but cherry berry, you can kind of get that cough syrup kind of taste. And they did it right. Big, big, big fan. So we got an 8.6 and an 8.3 from my end. Very, very happy with the selection.
Solid day. Really solid.
Yeah.
God, I want to crush one of those so bad.
Dude, the day you come back and I see you, I'm gonna probably have to do like a big gift basket of all the ones that like while you've been gone, like you couldn't get after, and I'll just be like, hey, here's this ghost flavor, here's the Naco, here's a root beer bum, like let me
Yep.
get you a first form blue raspberry or a cherry limeade, like
Yep. Followed by a trip to the ER from a caffeine overdose.
I gotta like just monitor you and like put like an EKG or like a polar heart rate monitor on you.
Yeah, you can't let me. Oh shit! All
But
right,
yeah,
folks. Well, that wraps up this episode of Bev Boys TV. Really appreciate you guys tuning in. Means a lot. Make sure to stay tuned for more episodes. Follow us on Instagram, bevboys.tv. as well as our personal Instagrams, which are always collabed with every Bed Boys post. So I'm French_fit40, always posting uh, other training content as well as Brian. Brian can be found at
B Shakuski, BSZUTKOWSKI. Just had a nice one about training the hip the other day. So that's pretty cool. If you want to learn from myself in person and you're young and you're an intern, we actually have an internship at Elon. You can email my email at bshakusky@elon.edu. We'd be glad to accept you for our summer internship, get hands-on experience, and of course, rate and review an energy drink in person. Definitely follow us and subscribe to us on YouTube as well. We are so close to 100 subscribers. I think we might try and do something big if we can get to 100 subscribers around episode 50. So 50 and 100, we may do a little giveaway or something like that for someone lucky. That's the idea behind it. Full video, as you guys know, is also available on Spotify. They let us in. They said, all right, like if you guys shut up, we'll let you put the video up. But check out bevboys.com as well for some gear. And we'll have a nice, fun time with a guest on our next one.
Yeah, so stay tuned for that. And definitely, if you're trying to get into performance, I would definitely recommend the Elon internship, best internship in the country, in my opinion. Learn from the best. Yeah, it's a no brainer. You'll have a really good time. So thank you guys for watching, and we will see you next time. Peace.
Peace.